Good morning, Hildur. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, considering the circumstances?
Oh yeah, it is. The environment right now is on our minds in so many ways. And I read a lovely reading this morning that we are of the earth and the sky, and we're in the womb of a new beginning. And I'm hoping that that's the case. And how important it is right now for our environment and the things that we can do to get in touch with the environment. So I'm very thankful. Again, you know me, I'm Keith Fiveson. Have worked with you as in my work mindfulness capacity, and you in your soul center capacity. And here we are talking about the environment. So what are we going to talk about today, Hildur, and what can we do about our environment? Please tell us.
Yes. So in terms of diversity, biodiversity, that's what this show is about, our living world. In terms of our relationship with the more than human world, beavers are probably the most misunderstood species that I can think of here in North America. They're incredibly versatile and probably one of our greatest ally in combating climate change. And people are not aware of their significant role in sequestering carbon. It turns out with the Green New Deal and all that jazz, we're talking about reducing fossil fuel emissions. And that, unfortunately, scientists have now found out is not enough. It's not going to be enough. We're too late to the show. If we had done that 30 years ago, we'd be better off today, but we didn't. So what we have to do is we have to think of all different ways to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And that has to do with sustainable regenerative agriculture and also cooperating with our allies in the living world who've been doing this for much longer than we've tried to. And I was thinking about beavers, and I remember I wanted to ask my friend David Yakim, who is our local expert, and our new friend Rachel, who is David's partner in this. And Rachel Lagotka I would like her to introduce herself, as she is upstate in New York and a specialist on this matter. I believe about in 2007 or so, a beaver was seen in Bronx River, and that was after 200 years of absence, and that was seen as a sign of health of the river. Much like when the osprey returned to the Long Island shoreline, we have these indicator species that we're doing a bit better. We now have the bald eagle returning. So why would it be significant for us to celebrate the return of the beavers? And another thing that my kids like thinking about is at the end of the Ice Age, I believe there were giant beavers in North America. Is that true? They were like man-sized. Yeah. Is that true? I want to hear from the experts about beavers and why we should care about beavers. Rachel.
First of all, I have to clarify this. I am absolutely not an expert on beavers. My degree is in classical literature and languages.
Yes.
But I got very well acquainted with them because I was on the Environmental Conservation Board in the village of New Paltz, and there were developments that were about to threaten the beaver and about to take away their habitat. And so then I met Dave, and Dave is more of an expert than I am. He's actually studied. He has a science background, and but I wanted to just, before I turn it over to him, I wanted to just make a few quick things. The carbon sequestering is just a really small part of what beavers do, and it's a little bit complicated because the sequestration isn't permanent. But they are absolutely beneficial to climate change because they promote biodiversity and because they retain water, and when it heats up, you lose water, and beavers are responsible for creating these aquatic environments and areas that store water, and they turn what are sort of scruffy areas, marshes into beautiful ponds. And they're a huge benefit that way. And why should you be happy that they're going to the Bronx? Because it means there's food there, and they eat trees and shrubs and plants, and if their beavers are coming into your town, it means you got some food for them.
And haven't they been declared as a nuisance? And why would that be? They are the largest rodent, and we do have a complicated relationship with rodents in the cities. So I think for the longest time, they were really not appreciated for their role in the ecosystem, right?
Yes. Well, it's not their role in the ecosystem. It's so much more so their choice of engineering. Because sometimes they decide that a nice pond would go over where a road is, for example, and they'll block up a culvert or they'll flood somebody's field. But, you know, humans are also good engineers, and there's ways of re-engineering what the beavers are doing so that everybody's happy, as opposed to just simply killing the beavers, which is what is usually done. And the reason that even though the DEC, if you look at their website, they acknowledge the, you know, environmental utility of the beavers, they also do still consider them a nuisance. And they also on their website list trapping and killing them as a means of controlling them, although they admit that it's temporary because they just end up coming back. It's cheaper. Especially if you do it during trapping season, because if you do it during trapping season, the trappers won't charge you for killing the beavers, since that's what they want to do there anyhow.
Yeah, so DEC, if anybody doesn't know, is the Department of Environmental Conservation, and it's always conflicted me when they recommend trapping endangered animals. Well, you know, I understand the need, but why do you care about beavers?
Well, why do I care about them?
Yeah.
Oh, have you ever? Well, for a lot of reasons. I mean, of course, I appreciate the beautiful ponds and the aquatic environment. It brings all kinds of biodiversity, different bird species. And the biodiversity is also beneficial to humans, just for health reasons, because it's, you know, when you just have the white-footed mouse and a lot of deer, they are vectors for Lyme disease. So if you increase the biodiversity, you increase the Lyme disease vector. And then because they're families, they're wonderful to watch. I know Dave and I both spent lots of time watching them, and I just they raise they're monogamous. They raise a little family. They keep their young for 2 years, living with them in a little house that they build. They're called lodges. You know, everybody knows what a beaver lodge is. And then, you know, they're very adorable. There's all kinds of videos online, National Geographic, and you can hear them. They go, beep, beep, beep. You know, the babies, they're really cute.
Yeah, you brought a significant point here, and probably a good segue to introduce David to the conversation in terms of biodiversity, why we should care. Often that fact is lost on people in terms of the tick epidemic here is really symptomatic of how we cleaned up the environment and got rid of you know, big, you know, nuisance animals and raptors, and we don't have the predators we need to manage the white-footed mouse, right, David? So do you want to speak about why you care about beavers?
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, as Rachel mentioned, we were working together in New Paltz in the Millbrook Preserve, a place very similar to the Hempstead Harbor Preserve in Port Washington. And the Millbrook Preserve had a population of beavers, and they maintained their various ponds, which from time to time the dams would burst, and they would create new ponds. From time to time, the town would trap beavers, and the beavers would come back. And every time they came back, they established new habitats for us to explore. And watching these habitats be created, destroyed by people in particular, sparked a great interest in conservation for me. And after moving back from New Paltz, where I got established a very interesting study of beavers, I came back to Port Washington, and as if the beavers were following me, I encountered the first beaver observed in Nassau County in hundreds of years in Port Washington. This beaver has actually traveled across the Long Island Sound to the Port Washington Peninsula, and after it crossed the Long Island Peninsula, it traveled over a major road and then a hill to find a secluded wetland, and in fact, the only wetland that would be able to support a beaver in our area, this beaver managed to find. So the type of habitats, the wetlands, the forests, the places that sustain beavers are wild places that are not visited.
David,
And,
David, I have to interrupt you. Can you speak up? David, can you speak up a bit?
I love. And
David,
David, can you speak
there
up?
is a,
oh, certainly. So I
do
was,
you,
yes.
maybe you need a headset like this.
Are we ready?
We can't hear you very well, David.
Rachel, cover me for 1 minute. Yes, so Rachel, if you cover me for 1 minute, I will be right back.
Yeah, so what we were just discussing is habitats. The beaver is very important in recreating really habitats that are lost upon us when in urbanization or suburban development, right? So that was what you were working on with David upstate. There was
Yes.
development that was, and that's why to me you don't really need a degree to be an expert. Just watching them as you did in their habitat and caring for them and caring about them makes you an expert in my mind, because you've actually spent time with a beaver and you appreciate their role in re-establishing habitats. And I think that's that's why we care. We need to bring back the biodiversity, and that helps us better protect ourselves from all sorts of zoonotic diseases. Right now, we're in the midst of a pandemic that's caused by a dysregulated ecosystem. And I want to encourage our all of our audience here, if they want to chip in, if they care about beavers or not, and if they see any even having a discussion about biodiversity right now, or if there's a question, I'd really like everyone to join us.
I have a question. I know David's going to be back in a moment, but can you, in a nutshell, describe how beavers are involved in carbon sequestration? I've never heard that before.
I'd like to, yes. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Everyone?
Excellent.
Okay. Okay.
So you're on Lori's.
So good. So I'm on Lori's computer.
Excellent.
And before coming to that question about biosequestration, I'd like to share how they change the landscape. So what a beaver will do, first off, the beavers seek running water. They seek streams, and it's this audio stimulus that makes them establish dams to stop that water from flowing. And in the process, the beavers, they create pond habitats. And beavers can create massive dams, hundreds of meters across, flooding huge areas. These ponds will then succeed over a long period of time. As sediment fills into the ponds, that they will turn it into another type of wetland called a marsh. And a marsh is just a very a wetland with deep saturated soils and tall grassy plants and flowering plants. The marsh will succeed into a wet meadow, which is a different type of habitat that's a little bit drier. the wet meadow will turn into a shrub swamp. The shrub swamp will turn into a hardwood swamp. And over time, you have a mosaic of all these different types of habitats all over the landscape, all alternating, all cycling over time. And so these countless different types of biological communities that the beavers create with a simple dam supports tremendous biodiversity all across the United States. And there used to be between 80 and 300 million beavers in the United States. They ruled the eastern coast. The eastern coast is a complex of marshes, woodlands, and diverse beaver habitats. And the Native Americans, they called the beaver the sacred center. We call them a keystone species. They modified the environment, and the reason, in order to establish food sources for themselves, they also provide food for Native Americans and wildlife. So there's when it comes to the services, the other services that this provides for us, for one thing is these ponds, they remediate pollution from our streams and our groundwater. As water flows through these beaver ponds and the reeds, the whatever pollutants there are get sequestered, they bind with the soils and the organic matter and take them out of our drinking water and out of the aquatic systems.
Yes, and David, there was a question here. John asking, his mother lives on a 12-acre lake. She's concerned that beavers will create Giardia danger, so like a parasite threat
Yes.
to the swimmers. Is that?
So the Giardia problem is actually a problem. In 1985, there were no safe places to drink water, just sitting water in New York because of Giardia. And so any rodent, in fact, near a pond, or at least lots of rodents will have Giardia that enter into pond systems and will infect people if you drink the pond water. So as long as you're not drinking the pond water, you're okay.
So we probably should declare wetlands like sanctuaries, like beaver sanctuaries, where we don't go in to swim, but they live. I think that's what wildlife experts are leaning towards now in terms of restoration and repair of habitats, is not just thinking of nature or living system as leisure parks for us to relax in, but rather declare wildlife habitats where we stay out of it. And I think that's the only way forward in terms of reestablishing some sort of healthy ecosystems where we have respect for all the living creatures in that ecosystem. We don't have to enjoy their habitats. And I think in terms of the rainforest, with the little that's left of intact forest landscapes, we really should stay out of it. We should declare the intact forest landscape in the tropics, especially where there is about 10,000 viruses waiting to be unleashed. We should really not be going on ecotouristic, safari rides through the jungle. We should really just stay out of there and have some respect for the other living beings who really don't need us to come in and take pictures of them. We can send them, yeah.
You can cohabitate with beavers. You can go on beaver territory. Beavers tend to reclaim, like the Millbrook, that used to be a dump where people rode their ATVs, and the beavers reclaim it. And they don't, as long as you aren't shooting and trapping them, they really don't mind the presence of humans. It's not like Giardia is not a really a big threat, like Dave was saying. You could get it from any other animal. A beaver doesn't increase your chances of getting it. And as far as the carbon sequestration goes, it's because the sediment settles into, when you cover something with water, the sediment settles down into it. So they sequester carbon in that way, but then it does and can also get released. And so, while they're great for an area that's, warmer areas as well, they're actually complaining about them in the north because they feel like the channels that they dig are allowing warmer water to reach the permafrost. So it's a mixed bag.
It's complicated.
But yes, it's complicated. Carbon sequestration wouldn't be like my number one reason for, for supporting beavers. But please
Yes.
don't think of them as exotic rainforest creatures. They really don't. You can sit and watch them. They really don't care. They have their own stuff they're thinking about. They don't really care as long as you don't bother them.
Well,
As long as you.
I like to make the point that we don't really, like, I think we must have some, like, respect for wildlife in the sense that I feel like it's like the way we humans relate to the living world is sort of to create a spectacle or go on, safari. I understand the need to connect, but sometimes a respectful distance is healthy. And I think that's key. It's significant in reestablishing some sort of an ecosystem that's not just for us to enjoy.
So I have a question. Maybe I don't know if David or yourself or who can possibly answer the question, but I'm not as familiar with beavers, and a lot of what I've heard is, they can really create some problems in terms of tree cutting and flooding and some of their activity. And I'm wondering, certainly wildlife needs to do what it does. Your point, Hildur, was that we need to have maybe wetlands or areas where they can, really be wild, run wild perhaps, and, human beings need to be out of those areas. I'm just wondering, what's the happy medium here, and how do we coexist?
Well, that's where we are trying to. It's a really delicate journey we're on, because we've created humans. You can find humans almost everywhere on Earth right now, and I think it starts with, in terms of just understanding what we've done on Long Island. That's probably the most that's close to us here, trying to understand why reestablishing biodiversity matters locally. We're not bringing back the beaver here, but we can start with feeding pollinators, and that's something very easy to do in reestablishing habitats. We need the pollinators. We have lost about a third of bird life in North America with our habits. And so if we start small and we start like that, and then we can, in terms of beaver, I just put a link here from National Geographic's where they dare to suggest that the beavers may actually help us combat climate change. So there are some scientists who are studying this. What does it mean that we've gotten rid of them in great numbers? Why were they here in the first place? I've heard people say that reforestation is not going to help with carbon sequestration. So these are all complicated cycles that we cut into, right? So I think studying the beaver and understanding its role in the ecosystem is something that before we eradicate it for being a really big rodent and a nuisance, like looking at what role could it play? It actually could play a role, but we're not going to know if we just trap it and kill it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we know. We just know tip of the iceberg. What I do know is reforestation. In terms of reforestation, that's a very complicated matter. Leaving the intact forest landscape alone, stopping deforestation is where we know we're not making a problem, right? So declaring all intact forest landscapes as sanctuaries for now and staying out of there for now, allowing there to be a little bit, we're losing right now twice as much forest cover as we're restoring on Earth right now globally. So that's significant, right? But we can only think locally in terms of then we have to stop the logging. We have to let the beaver do what it's doing. We have to stop cutting into something that we don't really understand. We could each plead the case that the beaver is good or bad in terms of carbon, emission or sequestration, but we don't really know. It hasn't been studied for there to be any certainty about this. So I think in terms of wildlife conservation, and the Center for Biological Diversity and other organizations are fighting for stay out of there for now. Let's step back, stop the logging. Ebola crisis, that was the palm trees. We need palm tree oil. These types of decisions have to be made on a global regulatory scale in terms of beef consumption. Do we need to clear these forests before we even know how? You don't even know. I think half of the world's biodiversity is living in rainforest, and we just keep cutting into it.
Right. So there is a lot of learning that we have to do, and certainly, beavers are not just they have been, when I was growing up, they were, beaver coats, and it was a fashion statement to have a beaver somehow wearing a beaver coat, and I think that the insensitivity of what's not only happened to the beaver, but also what's happened in terms of deforestation, and the natural landscape has really pervaded itself into a society. And of course, now we're talking about how to take care of and how to learn from what the beavers are doing and what they're actually giving back to the environment. And I think that's very fruitful. I think that's
and
I
yes,
want to say also.
and I also wanted to hear Paul. He mentions that there are beaver ponds in Sterling Forest. Paul, can you speak on where you've been?
Well, that's just what I've seen on hikes in the last few years. There's a few years ago, I was hiking the winter, and I saw this very large disturbance in the snow, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then it occurred to me that that was the beaver tail. The beaver was going from Sterling Pond to a small pond that they had obviously created next to it on the north end. And then in Harriman State Park, I forgot the name of the lake, but there are trees on the side of the lake that are obviously chewed and cut down by beavers. So they're around for sure, as David has said.
Yeah, I'd like to speak. So beavers have gotten a bad rap over the centuries. At one point, they were extirpated to as far as Canada, and they have recently come back. Associated with beavers closely are wetlands, which also have gotten a bad rap. Many people think of wetlands as unfavorable places that have no value, or even might bear mosquitoes and could be a liability and a detriment to our landscape. Well, actually, in our suburban habitats in our cities, around our region, almost all of our wetlands are gone. And this is not by coincidence. We have filled them in. We have removed the beavers. And something like 80% or more of just the peninsula of Port Washington's wetlands are gone.
Exactly, and the marshes are our best habitat for carbon sequestration, right? The wetlands.
That's absolutely true. Wetlands play so many vital roles in our lives, and the destruction of beavers and the destruction of wetlands, they go hand in hand. So both of them really need some good positive publicity and to speak about this. And wetlands, in fact, are protected by state law. A wetland that's over 12 acres is protected by law. And one of the reasons such harm is done to beavers is because they create wetlands. And if a land site is to be developed upon, the first thing that a landowner might do in certain cases is trap the beavers to essentially limit the wetland creation, or in you can look at it as the destructive capacity of the beavers. And this has happened actually in the Mill Brook, in the area that Rachel and I were discussing, and in Port Washington. Development upon wetlands is very common. And, but in both of these cases, interestingly, the developers did not disclose that they were developing on wetlands. And so the entire process from examining, doing surveys of the natural world, looking for beavers, looking for other wildlife, and then the process of establishing developments like parking lots and so on top of wetlands, on top of beaver lands, is a very important process that's happening even in Port Washington and all around the country. Wow. So every development we need to really focus and screen on the wetlands, their quality, their value, and weigh that equally, and hope and also consider beavers. Yes.
David, is there, I know we've got a certain amount of time left and we're going to have to be coming to a close. I'm wondering about action and how people might take action. Is there a website? Is there a petition? Is there something that people can do fundamentally to be in action and you know, helping out the problem? I think that's a huge problem, building over the wetlands and really you know, not having the sensitivity for cultivating the earth, if you will.
Yeah. So there's two things. Rachel might have more to add. One of them is to be vigilant of developments in your local or regional area, and work with your local civic group to bring forth concerns that you have about developments to local government, local land use planners, especially when it comes to wetlands. In my experience, I've worked with groups protecting 2 wetlands just through study and advocacy that support beavers. There's an organization that I work with, or at least that I have worked with, called Wetlands, Beavers, Wetlands, and Wildlife. And they're a nonprofit that focuses on beavers, their well-being, and well-being of the environment.
And I wanna acknowledge my friend Mary joined us today. Welcome on the call, Mary. Mary Miller is a long time environmental educator and a conservationist and all good things. Do you wanna say hi, Mary, before because we're actually going into overtime. We sometimes do. We tend to do actually go into overtime. Hi, Mary. Do you have sound on your?
While Mary's figuring that out, I also want to just put a plug in for John and see if, John, it sounds like a cultural activist movement of some art project that we can put together around beavers. I just want to throw that out to you to think about maybe separately, and we can talk about that later, huh?
Hi, I just want to thank you. It's been very informative and just very, you know, good information. I'm going to share it. I've worked at a forest preschool this year out in Islip through Seatuck, and I'm sharing, you know, bits of information about wildlife and animals with those parents, even though school just ended last week. So I'm just putting together information I can share with those families, and you know, they're very interested in all this conservation information. So little tidbits that they'll be knowledgeable about that they can pass on to their children when they're outdoors with them. So I appreciate all the information.
Thanks, Mary. It's so nice to have you with us.
Thanks, Hildur.
Hopefully we can hike soon in person here. I think
Yes.
it's about time to do that. I wanted to share with everyone the Beaver Pledge. Has everyone seen the Beaver Pledge?
Oh, I'm ready for the Beaver Pledge, please.
Right, the Beaver Pledge is worth. It's a good way to end.
I think we should all take it now, whatever it is. Let's do the Beaver Pledge, please.
Yeah, if you could let me share my screen, I could even share it on screen.
Yeah, please. I'm making you Hildur. I'm making you the you should be the co-host, but I'm making you the co-host, and you should be able to share your screen now, please.
Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
There we go. I think we all need some,
Say it all at one time.
yes, I'm ready.
All right, you ready? So we should take everyone off of mute, and everyone unmuted. Is everyone unmuted? Everyone is unmuted. So here we go. This is our closing Beaver pledge, and let's begin now.
Yes. I pledge
Pledge allegiance
allegiance
to
the
the
stream
streams
and
and the
and the
beaver
beaver
ponds
ponds
of America,
and to
to
the
the renewal
well
For
which they stand,
stand
one
one river
underground,
underground,
irreplaceable,
irreplaceable, with
habitat
habitat and wetlands for all.
for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hildur. That's absolutely
Thank you.
wonderful. And that said, I think this is a much deeper subject and much more profound than we can possibly give credit to in the course of 45 minutes. I really did mean that when I thought it was a wonderful cultural activist sort of art movement that I could see, instead of the big rat, people protest with a big rat, we should have a big beaver. And it should be really something along that line that we can go ahead and make a cultural statement for and get the press behind, because I think we'd be able to get some press with that. I think that would be very good. Make people think. Yeah, so we tasked John Halpern with that short. Let's see if he comes back with something. I think that would be great. So.
I propose we write an article about the Port Washington beaver and put that out there. It's a publication that I've never shared, but I think people around the country would be interested in.
Oh, great.
Yes, excellent. Thanks everybody for taking the time.
Thank you, Hildur, for leading us off, and everyone, thank you so much. We'll be concluding this session now, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very